responsibility. We don't look for it in the brain.
But there are real questions about whether if someone has had a damaged brain in some way, there's some part of the brain that's become impaired and they seem to be naturally more aggressive, more violent, or if there is retardation, should we hold those people as morally responsible if they commit some crime?
I think we hold them responsible, and then I think we move on to the question about what do we want to do about it. And that is a huge social question that we need to talk about. For instance, we should have a category of legal judgment where we say the person is guilty, responsible, and insane. We shouldn't have not guilty by reasons of insanity. So I think that you're on the safer side by saying we're all responsible, we all can follow rules. And then once we decide, well, he is the agent of the crime, he is the person that did the antisocial act, then we decide what we want to do about it. Do we want to treat? Do we want retribution, punishment of some kind? Do we want to social isolation? What do we want to do? That's a very intense and difficult but important debate to have.
But I want to come back to this paradox that you have raised, and the way you put it in your book, you say, we are personally responsible agents and are to be held accountable for our actions, even though we live in a determined universe. Because it would seem that if we live in a determined universe, then we are, in some way, we are not responsible anymore.
Yeah, brains are not automatic, but people are free. When brains start to interact, there's a level of relationships, there's a social ether that's created, and you can be held accountable to play by the rules of that new level of organization.
It sounds like you're saying that everything is not determined, and we don't live in a deterministic world.
Well, no, I don't see it that way. The brain is determined, but people are to be held responsible for their actions, and that's a prize outcome that we humans want to have.
Michael Gazzaniga directs the SAGE Center for the Study of the Mind at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and he's the author of Who's in Charge? Free Will and the Science of the Brain. If you'd like to hear Gazzaniga's take on the nature of consciousness, you'll find Steve's entire uncut interview on our website at ttbook.org/meetyourmind. Daniel Levitin has an unusual history for a neuroscientist. He used to be a well-known session musician, engineer, and record producer. Now, he runs the Laboratory for Music Perception and Expertise at McGill University. And by using advanced brain imaging technology, he's brought his two passions together to study the way we listen to and make music. Levitin came to our studio to talk with us.
One of the things that you've done that's so interesting is you've looked at how the brain hears and responds to music, and then you have looked at the ways in which composers and performers have played around with music as a result. And you brought a bunch of examples for us. I wondered if we could talk about some of those.
Sure. You know, one of the things that's so special about it is that almost all music has this sense of momentum. It's going somewhere, but it's going somewhere at a regular pace. Music has this beat, and in most music that we listen to, across genres, classical, hip-hop, rock, jazz, there's this very strong sense of when the next one's going to happen. Now, composers play around with that a bit. I brought an example of Stevie Wonder playing the drums. Many people don't know this, but he's a fantastic drummer. And he plays drums on most of his records. And in this little cut I brought from Superstition, any other drummer, I think, to set this up would basically go or maybe if they were more elaborate, they'd give you a kind of repetition of the hit, and you'd know exactly when something's going to happen, and you'd be able to predict both when and what. Stevie don't do that. He's playing around, and through the whole song, every time he goes through this pattern, he plays something slightly different. He hits the cymbals a little bit harder, a little bit softer. He adds extra beats. He takes a few beats away. It's sort of a game that he's playing with you, and you're both in on it. He's drawing you into this kind of musical game or puzzle of, what do you think I'm going to do next? Well, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't.
What is it that makes music pleasurable? This seems like an obvious question, I guess, because we all think music is pleasurable, but why? And when Stevie Wonder plays the drums that way, why is it we like it?
We now know, and it's pretty exciting, that there are pleasure centers in the brain, that when you have any pleasurable activity, these things become involved. And the neurons start firing, and they choreograph a kind of neurochemical release and uptake that allows dopamine to be squirted out through the brain. Dopamine is the feel-good neurotransmitter. Other neurons start firing that kind of stimulate your motor cortex and get you that tingly feeling.
So you want to dance?
Yeah, maybe. And it turns out that if you eat chocolate, or if you win a bunch of money, or you have an orgasm, these neural circuits come online, these pleasure centers, and they're the same ones that come online when you listen to music you like.
Now, related to this, I wanted to ask you about groove, which you wouldn't think of as a technical scientific term, but you have a whole kind of chapter, section of a chapter in there about what you call groove. What is it?
Really, I'm using it to say something that makes you want to get up and dance, or tap your foot, or tap the foot in your mind. What's going on in your brain is that your cerebellum is trying to track the regularity of events in the world all the time. It's synchronizing, and in part of the synchronization, it's trying to figure out what's going to happen next and when. And the cerebellum is also connected to your motor cortex, so it sort of induces you to want to tap your finger, or snap your finger, or clap, or move your foot. And I brought another example. I think Superstition has this great quality, but also I think Tell Me Something Good by Rufus has it. One of the reasons it has it is because it's not exactly the same each time. So what that's doing is it's preventing your cerebellum and the rest of your brain from habituating to it. Because the music changes around, it's constantly keeping our brains involved. A wah-wah guitar, so you hear the bass go boom, and then go whack, boom, whack, boom, whack, boom, whack. And the whack is this guitar, and it's a little bit different every time, partly because the guitarist is really skilled, but also you're dealing with a human being who's not able to behave or play like a machine.
Another way composers and performers play with expectations has to do with chords, which chords they use. And there's a story you tell about Joni Mitchell and some trouble she had with bass players. I wondered if you could tell that story.
Bass players typically in pop music are playing the root of the chord. The best way to describe it is it's sort of like the anchor point. It's the point that your ear is drawn to.
It's home.
Right, it's the harmonic home. And Joni writes her and invents her own chords and her own voicings. And she doesn't know any music theory. So bass players used to ask her, well, what's the root of that chord? Because they wanted to know what to play. But Joni felt that the music lost something as soon as they did play that note. And uniquely among popular songwriters, she writes ambiguous chords. Chords that could be interpreted in two or more different ways. So when she finally met Jaco Pastorius, the late Jaco Pastorius, the bass player from Weather Report, she met a really kindred spirit because he didn't ask her what the root was and he didn't look for it. He danced around the ambiguity, which allowed her music to maintain a more ethereal and I think really a more open-ended quality.
And that what makes her music, gives it that kind of floating quality.
series Meet Your Mind, a user's guide to the science of consciousness. Brought to you by Wisconsin Public Radio and PRI, Public Radio International.
And now, another WNYC sustaining member haiku, as read by Chad Abumrad.
Each morning I rise, calmed and informed by the voice of Satirius. Jordan Schaefer.
Become a sustaining member today. Go to WNYC.org, click on support, or call 1-888-376-WNYC.
WNYC receives support from The New School, presenting the Public Art Fun Talks at The New School with Berlin-based Scottish artist Susan Phillips, Wednesday, March 20th, 6:30 p.m. Tickets at 212-229-5488 or newschool.edu/events. Our series, Meet Your Mind, a user's guide to the science of consciousness, is supported by Omega Corporation, providing tools and technologies for research in life science, and the North Foundation, exploring meaning and commonality of human experience.
Every so often a book comes along that changes what we thought we knew. Ian McGilchrist's The Master and His Emissary is that kind of book. A heady mix of neuroscience and cultural history. It's a densely argued 500-page study of the left and right hemispheres of the brain and how this divided brain has shaped modern history. McGilchrist is a polymath, a former literary scholar at Oxford University who went on to study philosophy and then became a psychiatrist. He tells Steve Paulson that we need both sides of the brain. But he says the left hemisphere has become so dominant in Western culture that we're losing the sense of what makes us human.
You know, it strikes me that what you're doing is almost a taboo subject in neuroscience, the idea that the brain has these two fundamentally different hemispheres, because a lot of brain scientists remember all that talk 30 or 40 years ago